I recently raced in my first ever duathlon alongside a world champion, so in this video I'm going to recap the event, let you know how I did and what I'd do differently next time. Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new, my name is Chris and I'm an amateur triathlete based in the UK. Now, despite doing several triathlons of varying distances in the last few years, I've never done a duathlon. Now that all changed on the 19th of March when I took on my first race of the season and my first duathlon. So a bit about the race itself. It was the Donut Duathlon, which took place down in Paignton, so around a 90-minute drive for me, which wasn't too bad at all. It has this name as they hand out a donut at the end for all of the finishers, so that was very nice. If you're wondering which flavour I went for, it of course had to be jam. There was no way in hell I'd be getting a plain one, so that was even more motivation to place up as high as I could before all the jam ones went. Now this was a sprint distance duathlon, so it started off with a 5k run, followed by a 19.5k bike and another 2.5k run. What made this particular event a bit more interesting for me was the fact that the bike course took place on a velo park, and I've never ridden one on before. My race started at 12 PM, so there wasn't a silly early start or anything like that, but they did have several shorter races happening before for all the kids to get involved. It wasn't a massive event with only 60 or so in my race, but it was still well organised and I managed to rack my bike and get my transition area all sorted nice and early. So around an hour before the start I had a bar and a swig of the bottle that I was taking on the bike, but in hindsight I don't think this was quite enough as I didn't feel particularly well fueled going into my warm-up. I was doing a bit of a run course recce as it wasn't super clear from the map and it just felt harder than it should have, but it was too late to really do anything about it, so I just hung around waiting for the start at 12. I did struggle a fair bit at the beginning of the first run, going off for the first kilometre around a 350 kilometre pace, but I eventually settled into something that was a little bit more sustainable. The run course was quite challenging and felt like more of a cross-country race at times. A good 90% of the 2.5k loop took place on grass, and although it was good weather on the day, there were places where it was just a bog and I nearly stacked it several times. There were also some pretty big holes in the grass to dodge, but everyone did work together in pointing them out for those coming up behind. Now the first thing I would do differently next time would be to wear a different pair of shoes. I knew ahead of time that most of the run was going to be on grass, but thought I'd be fine wearing a pair of regular road shoes. When I was looking around the start, I did start to see a good mix of trainers, including some super shoes, but most people were wearing off-road or trail shoes, and I would definitely do the same next time. I am really glad I didn't wear my carbon racing shoes, not only because of the stability needed on the grass, but also the fact that they are white, so it got absolutely filthy and would have been a massive pain to try and clean. So the first run had you do 2 of the 2.5k loops to make up the distance to 5k before heading into T1. This could have gone a bit better, but wasn't too bad considering I'm a bit rusty and I haven't really practiced it at all. I chose not to clip my shoes in on the bike ahead of time, again as it's not something I've practiced, but in hindsight I don't think doing so would have made much of a difference in the grand scheme of things. Certainly not a higher placing at the end of the entire race. Onto the bike now, and I'm really pleased with how it went, especially as I was able to catch up with a few of the guys that finished the run ahead of me. Being a velo park, the surface was lovely and smooth, and although you would expect it to be pan flat, there were a few little lumps that added up having looked back at the elevation profile afterwards. I was a bit wary of the sharpish bends going into it as I don't really have any experience with those sorts of corners, but they were fine and my confidence only grew as I ticked off the laps. As a lap of the velo park was only 1500 metres, we had to do 13 of them to make up the full distance. Some people might not really like this, but it didn't bother me in the slightest, and I ended up really enjoying the bike leg. It was quite windy on the day and there was only one stretch where we had a bit of a tailwind, so I took this opportunity to take on some fuel in the form of car powder and electrolytes in my bottle. I wasn't sure as to whether I would even need any fuel given how short of a race it was, but I'm really glad I took something on as I felt like I needed it by this point and was getting quite warm despite it still being March. Average speed on the bike was 35k an hour, which I was really pleased with, especially as we had to slow right down for the 26 sharp bends. Rather than tell you all the stats here, take a look on my Strava instead if you want to, as all of my training and races get uploaded there. Back into T2 now, and this one went much better. Again, I didn't just take my feet out of the shoes and instead unclipped normally and ran the very short distance to the racks. Off came my helmet and cycling shoes and I slipped back on my trainers to head off the final 2.5k run. Looking back now, I think this is the smoothest T2 I've ever done, even without practicing it beforehand, so another positive to take away from the day. I had several people ahead of me at this point, so it's nice to have someone to focus on and chase down. I'm pretty sure I passed a good 3 to 4 people on this run, and even my very measly attempt at a sprint finish allowed me to finish just ahead of someone on the line and make up an extra position. Overall, I finished 12th and was 5th in my age group, which I think was 16 to 40s. I was pleased with my overall performance, especially on the bike, and I finished sooner than I was expecting. Before going into it, bearing in mind that I haven't done a duathlon before, I thought I'd finish in maybe 110 or 115. My finishing time was a smidge under 105, so very pleased with that. The race was won by multiple world champion in both triathlon and duathlon, Donald Brooks, so it was very inspiring racing alongside him. He was absolutely flying on the bike and finished in just under 56 minutes, which is just nuts. The Donut Duathlon was a nice, localish event put on by Sportiva Events that was easy to get to, good fun, and catered to a large number of ages and abilities. There is a triathlon at the same place in a few weeks' time, which I'm still considering doing, with the swim taking place in the leisure centre just next door to the Velo Park. If I do decide to do it, I'll definitely be packing the trail shoes for the run and make sure I'm fueled up a bit better going into it. But other than that, I wouldn't really do anything differently. So I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, please do consider subscribing, as I have several more events coming up this year, which I'll be documenting here on the channel. You might want to next watch this video here on screen, where I recap the first ever triathlon I did back in 2021, which was the Croyd Ocean Triathlon. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you again in the next one.